Hi, everyone. It's Dina at the Realize Foundation. And today I'm here with Lucy Meyer, and I'm super excited for you to hear her story. So, Lucy, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, real quick, and we'll dive in?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so I am an entrepreneur in Chicago, and my story is pretty unique in the way that I was raised in a religiously extreme group or cult, what some people may call a cult. It's called the Family International. It was called the Children of God when I was younger, and it was very unique. I want to say I had very loving parents, and that was probably the best part of my life. Was the fact that my parents were very, very loving, very involved. But there was a lot that I went through as a child, growing up in that way. Hmm.
Yeah. And now Lucy is a happiness coach. So, we're going to talk about that at the end of this episode as well. So, stick around.
Yes.
So, tell us a little bit about the cult and you know, what your mental state was growing up in that environment.
Sure, sure. So I feel like the media, and there's documentaries and there's different things, and they focus a lot on the sexual abuse and that type of stuff. And honestly, that was not my experience. It was not a daily thing, or not the way that documentaries kind of try to portray it. But I think that the main thing that was very harmful growing up was the fact that kids within the cult were believed to be like, how could I say this, like property of the state. So we didn't, like, from a very young age, we were taught that our life was to serve a purpose that was God's God's plan. And of course, God's plan was whatever the cult leadership believed we should do. So we didn't really get a choice as to like what we got to read. We didn't get to go to regular school. We were all homeschooled. We lived in huge communes with between, I think the largest commune I lived in was like 75 people in Cuernavaca, Mexico. And then they range from like 25 to 40 people, things like that. Sometimes it was just my family, and that was wonderful. Those were the highlights of my childhood. But mostly it was that way. There was also a lot of corporal punishment, which I think was harmful, especially because anybody was allowed to punish children, like any adult within the commune. And oftentimes it was not done lovingly. And then as a young child, I was also separated from my parents for months without any explanation or, anything. Like just one night, some cult leader showed up and said, you're going to this other, you're just going to get in that van and you're going. And I was separated from my parents for about 4 months, I think. And that was very, very difficult, very traumatic, because there was a lot of corporal punishment in the commune that I was taken to with my younger brother. And so it was difficult. It broke our spirit. I think it broke the spirit of the kids that grew up in many ways. Yeah.
Wow. So then you were reunited with your parents at some point?
I was, yeah. So my mom was not happy about that.
Of
but
course.
but my parents were not leaders or anything like that. So they didn't really have much of a say in the way that things were done. So my mom was very upset. She kept writing letters to the local leadership. This was in Mexico. So
Mhm.
after about 4 months, she finally got an answer, and they took us back to my parents. But that particular experience created in me depression, like chronic depression,
Mhm.
which I will go into later. How I overcame that, and
Mhm.
and that was actually one of the main reasons why I became a therapist and a hypnotherapist. Was, yes, because I got healed from my chronic depression through healing that memory and that experience.
That's
Yes.
wonderful. That's
Mhm.
it's that little sentence gives so many people hope that there is a way out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, it was one of the most wonderful things when I finally healed from depression, from chronic depression and sadness that I would experience even after I had met my financial goals. And, I was living a dream life by the books, but I still had this like inner emptiness and sadness and depression. And I got healed from it through healing childhood trauma. Hmm.
That's great.
Yes.
So will you take us to the time when you were getting out of the cult, or the end of that phase, and what happened after that?
Yes, yes. So when I was 22, I started to I started thinking for myself, because within the cult, we one of the practices was that every morning we would wake up and have what was called devotion. So we had to read the writings of the cult leaders for an hour to an hour and a half every day. I think now as an adult, I realized that that was a way to keep the mindset going. But when I was 22, I started to really question things, and I had a life existential crisis because it was the only thing that I had ever known. And we were taught that, that if you left, you might upset God, and you were backsliding, and God wasn't going to be pleased with you, and you weren't going to find your place in the world, and all these things. But regardless of that, we still chose to leave. And at that time, we were living in, and when I say we, it was my husband and myself. We were living in Guatemala, at a commune, and so we chose to move out. But I mean, there was a huge complication because we didn't have any connections to the real world. We didn't have a secular education. We didn't have any resume, to go up and someone and say, now I realize we actually did have a lot of life experience, but we didn't know it at the time, and we didn't know how to translate it into telling people.
Mhm.
So we made the decision to go. We moved to Mexico because my dad is originally from Mexico. And so we moved to Mexico. We actually crossed the border by land from Guatemala with our two little girls. A very big adventure, crossing with tons of luggage and with two little girls on a bus by land. So we moved to Mexico, and it was extremely difficult. It was a very, very, very difficult situation. But I remember, so what happened was we didn't really have any money. We didn't have anything. All we had was like Christian materials, like books and Bibles and things like that. And we would sell it door to door just to pay our bills, and that's what we were doing, kind of trying to figure out, like, what do we do now? And so we were living in a house of a friend who had loaned us her house. She was charging us like $100 a month in rent, and the house had a problem with rats and mice. And we were living in this house, and just kind of like, it literally felt like being dropped off a helicopter, just like, boom, here you go. I felt like an alien. Like I would go try to apply for a job, and I didn't even know how to answer the questions that they were asking me. Like, it was very, very difficult.
Mhm.
So I remember one night, my brother, he had already left the cult a few years back, and he had struggled, but he had done really, really well in sales, selling properties in Costa Rica, to people from the U.S. and from different places. So he implanted this seed of faith in me on that day. It was one night I had put my girls to bed, and I was feeling like at the bottom of the bucket. And I still get emotional remembering. And he told me, he said, Lucy, I want you to do something. He said, you need to have faith that you can create something that's like beyond what you're living right now. I'm sorry. I still get emotional. And I said, but how? Look at us. Like, look at us living here. Look at this. And he said, he gave me a piece of paper and a pencil, and he said, you're going to write down what you want in 10 years. Where do you want to see yourself? And I said, well, what if it doesn't happen? I'm going to be heartbroken, you know? And he said, you're already heartbroken. You're not just heartbroken. He said, your life is broken, Lucy. Like, your life is in shambles. You really can't go any lower, you know? So I said, okay. So I grabbed a pencil and a piece of paper and I wrote down a very ambitious goal for me at that time. I said, I was 23 years old at the time. And I wrote it down. I said, by the time I'm 33, I want to own 2 homes and I want to have $500,000 in assets, savings, something, you know? And he said, okay, if it doesn't happen, nobody's going to know, just you and me. It's our little secret, you know? And I said, but if it does happen, you're going to be amazing, you know? And I want to say, because this is a huge part of my story, by the time I was probably 30, I had co-created a company with my brother where we owned not two, probably like 29 houses. And not just in the US, but in Costa Rica as well, you know, and yeah, so it definitely, you know, that seed of faith was, it was amazing.
Wow. That's powerful because, in 2018, I was asked to write a chapter in a book, and it was about business. And it was all in the principles of Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich, the book. And, the number one concept from him that I love is that whatever our mind can conceive and believe, you can achieve.
Yes.
And it's kind of, you have to really think about that. You have to really think about, like, if I can dream up this idea and then I can actually believe it can happen, then I
Yes.
can do it.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times it's our own minds who keep us from accomplishing whatever it is. And
Right.
so I just think that fits so well with what you said. Because
Yes.
sometimes we sabotage ourselves. Like, we have the idea and we don't believe that we can do it. But obviously you believed that you could.
Yes. Yes, I did. Yes. And I also, there's something that I really believe in, and it's something that I want to write about in Scars to Stars, you know, and I call it our invisible compass, you know. So I have this whole belief, this theory. I believe that, you know, the Bible teaches us that God is love, right? And and the part of us that is in charge, like humans, we're so complex. We have spirit, mind, soul, body, you know, heart, all the different parts. But the part of us that connects us to love is our heart, right? And so I believe that our heart is like, it's our intuition as well. And it's the part where we listen to God, where we connect to God, you know? And so after that experience there in Veracruz, I mean, my story is very, very long. You know, we went through a lot. There were many steps to get to where I am today. And I'm still on a journey, you know. But when people ask me, like, how did you get there, you know? And I don't think that there's like a roadmap. I think that it's your heart. Like, that's how wise God is. You know, and I think that at every step I connected to my intuition, and I allowed myself to make decisions based on my intuition, even when they didn't make complete sense, you know, even when they were a little bit like against my logical mind. I always allowed myself to take those risks, you know, to take steps and make moves and create businesses and do things just by connecting to my heart and my intuition, you know.
That's awesome. So let's talk about how you got to where you are now and being a coach and teaching people how to be happy, and
Yes.
how, how did you get from when you started this business with your brother and you started seeing success, and then the journey to where you are now?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So at one point, it was a whole journey. We moved from Mexico. We went to Asia. Excuse me. We were teaching languages in Asia because that was one feature of being raised in a cult with so many people. I would say that was one of the positive aspects, was we were an extremely international community. So most of us kids who were raised this way, we all speak at least two languages, and oftentimes three or four. So we were teaching languages in Asia, and we were semi-stable there. But once again, the intuition, I was like, no, I know I'm meant for more.
Mhm.
So we got offered a job in Chicago, doing sales, just doing door-to-door sales. And um and and I was very good at it. I was very, very good at doing door-to-door sales. So long story short, we ended up opening our own company, in remodeling. So we started selling remodeling jobs, in Chicago. And then we started getting into real estate, and we had all these different businesses. But at one point, I really closed myself off, and there was a lot of lack of forgiveness. I was very closed off to first of all, to talking about my story. It was just something I never discussed with anybody. But when you have been through something like myself, being raised, um if you don't tell your story, you can't build friendships. Because how do you explain? There's just too many loopholes, when you're trying to cover up such a huge story. You can't build friendships. So I had very few friends, only friends that I knew from before, and I was living a life that was very disconnected. I was basically trying to live life by the book, like trying to do the whole American dream thing, have a big house with the white picket fence, which there's nothing wrong with it, but I wasn't really listening to my heart. Like, I was just doing business, and my I would say my emotional health was not good, because what I was doing was drinking every night. That was my pastime, just drinking every night, and pretty disconnected from my kids and all this stuff. So in November of 2020, the year of COVID, my daughter started having a very strong abdominal pain. And I myself had COVID in that moment. So I didn't take her to the hospital. I called her pediatrician, and he said, "Oh, she must just have COVID, just wait it out, wait until the COVID passes. And then if the abdominal pain continues, then you take her." So the abdominal pain did continue, and it ended up with us being in the emergency room for about 7 or 8 hours. I don't remember exactly. And they did all these tests and exams on her. She was 11 years old at the time. And then the emergency care doctor decided that she did need surgery on that day, and he said, "Okay, we're going to admit her. We just need the pediatric surgeon to give the go ahead for her surgery." So I went to grab a coffee while they did that. And when I returned, to my dismay, they said the pediatric surgeon has decided she doesn't need surgery. And something, my heart just sank, because I knew something was wrong, because I knew her abdomen had been hurting for days now. And I was like, "But why? Like, you guys did ultrasounds, blood tests, urine tests, like, why?" And they said, "Well, we don't really know, but he said no, so you got to go." So they kicked us out, basically, like, escorted us out of the emergency room. And sure enough, the abdominal pain came back, and a lot worse, as soon as the painkillers went away. So uh, like about 36 hours later, we were back. But this time, like, we were really losing her. Like, we were losing her. And we went back to the emergency room at around 3 in the morning. And what should have been a 40-minute intervention ended up being about 8.5 hours, with multiple, what do you call it? Like, they opened her in multiple parts. And, by this time she had a huge infection because her appendix had burst. And
Oh
so,
my
yeah, and she had her intestine was perforated in different parts, and so it was just really, really tremendous. And so when I sat in that emergency room, and I may get emotional again,
gosh.
you know, I really thought about my life. And I said, "Oh my God, there are so many things that have been on my heart, and even my connection with my kids and the way that I was living my life." And I said, if my daughter doesn't make it today from this surgery, I will have like regrets as deep as the ocean. There's so many things, so many people that I've pushed away. I'm just drinking too much. So on that day, I thank God she survived the surgery, and she was kind of in intensive care for 4 months because there were things that were inconclusive. But I made a decision on that day. I said, I'm not just meant to be a um, a disconnected, materialistic businesswoman. I know that there's more to life than that. So I started searching. I started on a search. It took time because by then I was living like the way I had set up my life was that way. I didn't really have a lot of friends. Everybody was an acquaintance. Everybody was very image based. It was all like that. But I started to reconnect with God and ask Him what was the purpose of my life, and God brought a hypnotherapist across my path. And she told me, she said, well, the reason why you feel so disconnected is because you have a gift. And she said, and everybody has a gift, but your gift is buried under a lack of forgiveness, under resentment, under all those things. So she told me to meditate for 21 days and ask God to show me what was my gift, that I was meant to give back into the world. And so on the seventh day, I had a memory where I remembered, that I've always had a heart for people. I'm a very empathetic, intuitive person when it comes to my relationships. That's probably why I'm very good at sales. But anyway, so I realized that was my gift, and then I went into hypnotherapy school. Through this hypnotherapist, I healed a lot of my childhood traumas. I started to open myself up to forgiveness, and now I'm a regular therapist. I do energy healing as well, and I'm a hypnotherapist. Yes.
That's amazing. It's funny sometimes how God gets us to our purpose, isn't it?
It sure is. Yes. Yes. And
So,
sometimes he has to bring us to our knees. It has to come through like something strong. Yes.
yes, I have a similar experience, definitely. And I think I've told you this, but I spent 23 years hiding my suicide attempt, and then in 1 year I had a life-changing surgery and lost a friend to suicide. And then in 2020, I lost my business to COVID. And the combination of all of that has gotten me here.
Wow. Amazing.
No, you're right. Sometimes we do have to, like Toby Mac says, you have to lose everything to gain the world,
That's right.
something like
Yeah.
that's not his exact words, but that he has a song about that, about losing your soul
Mhm.
to the world, and gaining everything through God. And it's that speaks to my heart so much, because it's true. You think I spent 40 something years thinking that I knew everything and I was doing the right thing, and then in my late 40s everything changed. I mean, just everything. And
Wow.
it was like starting over, starting life over again at a very late date. But anyway, I think, um, so do you have any words of advice for people that might be going through any of the situations you've been through? You've been through a lot.
Yes, yes. Yeah, well, I mean, actually, it's funny you brought up Napoleon Hill because that was exactly the book that my brother recommended I read in that moment, and I did.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, I would say if um if I found somebody whose life looks like mine,
Mhm.
at that point, that was 15 years ago when I first left the cult and all of that. I would say, first of all, yes, establish a dream, even if it's outrageous, even if it sounds ridiculous, and write it down because when you write it down, you are imprinting it into your own subconscious mind and into your own heart. The second thing I would say is develop that intuition, that relationship with your heart, because I think that for me, that was my lifesaver. Like I didn't really have, I didn't have a degree. I didn't have anything, but but I went to Asia on an intuition, and that's where we saved our first little bit of money, got our first little experience in the regular world. And and when I say the regular world, it's because I was raised in the other world. And yeah, and if we hadn't gone to Asia, we would not have had even the finances or anything to survive the first year in Chicago. So I definitely think that that was a godsend. And then once we were in Asia, we also had a beautiful apartment. It was um apparently a very good situation, especially for what we had. But once again, I heard that intuition, and so sometimes the intuition, I think the intuition is huge, and I think everybody has it. But the thing is that we allow our logical mind to kick us out of that intuition, and I mean, I'm a real believer in God and in miracles and in supernatural things, and sometimes God doesn't operate by the rules of what everybody's saying, so believe in that intuition and allow yourself to make those decisions based on what your intuition is calling you to do. Yeah. And third, don't give up. Never give up.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
really good advice. Um, really good advice. It's the people who are persistent that make it to where they're trying to go. And I
Yes.
think that's a very good lesson. Um, so I'm gonna put your
Hmm.
link up here, but you want to tell people about how to find you and what they can find on your website.
Sure. Yeah. So my website, I'm going to be honest, it's very basic. It's not the only ways that I work with people. You can also look me up through my Instagram. You can reach out to me in different ways, and I work with people in different ways. But I'm a hypnotherapist. Through hypnotherapy, I specialize in trauma healing. That's my specialty, I would say, because I embody trauma healing.
Mhm.
So that's the reason why. But I also do just regular therapy. I work with people every week or every 10 days. I have regular patients. And I also do energy work, energy work, which is also in line with healing traumas, removing blockages, and also teaching you to develop that relationship with your own heart and with your intuition, and how we learn to listen to our heart, and then we use our physical body to get us to where our heart is leading us to go. Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Lucy, thank you so much for being on Scars to Stars podcast and for spending time telling us about your story. And what we do at the Realize Foundation is all about personal story and how to get other people to know they're not alone in their struggles and that there is hope to get to the other side. So I
Yes.
really appreciate you sharing part of your
Mhm.
story here. And for those of you who want to learn more, Lucy's going to write in our book 4. So
Yes.
we're excited about that as well. Any last words you have?
No, I just want to say thank you, Dina. Thank you for having me on here, and thank you for doing this work, this amazing work. Yes.
Thank you so much.